morning, everybody. Welcome at last to today's webinar, which is Advancing Farmer Clusters in Europe, Lessons, Tools and Strategies from the Framework Project. My name's Begg. I am the coordinator of the Framework Project, and I'm really pleased to have you here with us today. And of course, I'm really sorry that it's taken us a little while to get started. We were all set up with our colleague Beatrix having got everything in place, but she's had to go away at the last minute. And so we were just picking up where she'd left off, and then we had a problem with the sound within the auditorium here, which is now, thankfully, seems to be fixed. Okay, so this event comes to us at a special moment for the Framework Project, because just within a few days we have the official wrap-up, the finalisation of the project. It's been running for the last 5 years, funded by the EU Horizon 2020 programme. And we're here today to reflect a little bit on some of the things that we've learned, to share some of the highlights from the project over the last 5 years. Okay, so Framework's been all about supporting biodiversity in farming, but doing so by working with farmers. We've worked with farmers across Europe to set up and run clusters as a way of helping shape more sustainable future for agriculture. And that means supporting farmers directly, but embedding this within a wider system approach. And so the farmers are provided with access to tools, training, resources, knowledge, and so on, but also attempting to connect them into the wider system, connecting them with actors from science, policy, markets, and so on. It's been about creating change that's practical, grounded, and long-lasting, we hope. The leaflet that I'm showing you at the moment introduces the underlying concept for the project, the idea behind the approach that we've been using. But I don't want to dwell on that just now, on the details. You'll have access to this through the presentation, so you'll be able to look at that later. But what I'd like to do now is just run this video for you, which I think will give you a more immediate sense of what the project's been about. It'll just be a minute or so.
So I'm sick with time to
Okay, so I'm going to pause that there. You'll have a chance to see the video in its entirety again at the end of this webinar. But I want to bring us back to the idea of farmer clusters, because they have been at the heart of the Framework Project. So let's just say very briefly what farmer clusters are. They're groups of farmers working together across the landscape collectively to support biodiversity. They're led by farmers, shaped by local needs, and flexible enough to be able to change and adapt what they're doing as they progress. It might be a bottom-up approach, but the farmers aren't expected to work alone. They're supported with training and knowledge and sharing of resources, and are connected into wider communities of science, policy, and others. You'll see today what this looks like in practice, I hope, from wildflower strips to cover cropping, to the biodiversity monitoring that's gone on, and to the community engagement. It's been about working with nature, tracking what matters, and learning together as we go along. We've got a great lineup today. We're going to start in a moment with a little bit of background on the development of farmer clusters in England, which has started as a GWCT initiative. And then we're going to hear directly from the facilitators about their experiences with the clusters from Framework and beyond. We're going to explore the tools and resources that we've developed as we've gone through the project. And we're going to consider some of the achievements as well as the challenges that have been faced on the way. And then finally, with help from yourselves, we'll take a look ahead to see what might be coming next. So thanks again for joining us, whether you're a farmer, a scientist, a policymaker, or even just somebody interested in biodiversity and or farming. We hope that today gives you something valuable that you're able to take away. Okay, so let's get started. I'm now going to find the next presentation.
Hello, I'm Neville Kingdon from the Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust, and I am going to give an overview of the early days of farmer clusters and how they have grown and developed over the years. GWCT developed the farmer cluster concept in the early 2010s. Inspiration from several projects came together to result in the farmer cluster concept. The two projects that really fed into this were the Marlborough Downs Nature Improvement Area and the GWCT's Sussex study, our long-running study across several farms on the South Downs. Nature improvement areas were an initiative from the English government to support landscape-level ecological connectivity and biodiversity. The Marlborough Downs NIA was the only one of 12 nature improvement areas in the country to be farmer-led. The Sussex study was a second project, covering 23 square kilometres, and was the location for a large-scale, 1,000-hectare recovery project for grey partridges that was run by the landowner. Both projects inspired the GWCT to develop this concept of farmer-led landscape-level conservation, and the early successes of the Sussex study and the Marlborough Downs NIA motivated the government through Natural England and DEFRA to provide funding for a new pilot project. This saw 5 pilot clusters being formed, with Peter Thompson, GWCT's farmland advisor, bringing together like-minded neighbouring farmers to work collaboratively across farms at a landscape scale. These initial clusters ranged from 10 square kilometres up to over 100 square kilometres. Peter identified a lead farmer. This needed to be someone who was respected for both their farming know-how, but also their interest in conservation. Each cluster chose its own facilitator. This was a local advisor who was trusted, experienced, and who the farmers were comfortable working with, often on conservation projects already. Several were from GWCT, but we didn't impose ourselves on the clusters. Each cluster chose a facilitator they were comfortable with. The first meeting consisted of getting the group together, often around a kitchen table, and having one or more large maps showing the locations of species records for their area, and then asking the group, what wildlife do you want on your farm? This initial kitchen table gathering was an important step. Many of the farmers did not know what species had been recorded on their land. They'd never been told. They also took time to consider what species were missing from their land. This was in 2012, and was the first attempt to set up clusters and to see how best to organize their efforts at a landscape scale. The pilot was considered successful, and the government set out funding to support and expand the farmer cluster concept. That funding stream was available through countryside stewardship and was termed facilitation funding, essentially covering the costs of having dedicated facilitators. Funding was on a competitive basis. Groups of farmers, usually working with a chosen local facilitator, applied for funding, highlighting which priority species they proposed to focus their efforts on. Funding lasted for 3 years, and most clusters, at least initially, were funded in this manner. However, it is important to note that there are, in reality, 2 funding streams. The alternative to facilitation funding is for a cluster to fund itself, independently. This can give a cluster more flexibility, as the government-supported facilitation funding cannot be used for one-to-one advice. In contrast, independent funding can help pay for baseline surveys and ongoing work to monitoring change as the cluster develops. Farmer clusters who decide to use independent funding use a variety of methods. These include a tithing system based on size of holding or accessing commercial support, often from water companies for pollution offsetting, natural capital funding, and from grant-making charitable trusts. At the GWCT, we have worked with both types, although there is now a tendency for clusters to start with facilitation funding and move to independent funding after their first round of funding has ended. This was especially the case when there was a several-year pause in funding after the initial 3 years of funding had ended. The newest initiative utilizing the farmer cluster concept are environmental farmers groups. These cover several farmer clusters. For example, several are based on river catchments or across large areas of protected landscapes. The birth of these environmental farmers groups was at least in part due to changes in the financial support to farmers, and specifically the discontinuation of the direct area-based payments that followed Brexit. Although some funding is available from the UK government through agri-environment schemes for the conservation of biodiversity, this funding is not as reliable as the direct payment had been. Agri-stewardship funding also tends to be funded on a cost recovery basis, without an element of profit. This meant that many farmers needed to explore alternative funding to support their farms and remain economically viable. These environmental farmers groups are farmer-led and owned, and essentially operate as environmental cooperatives. Although born out of farmer clusters, they are much bigger and more ambitious and have a business structure that allows them to access environmental trades and green finance. Because of their large scale, EFGs are able to consider environmental aspects beyond biodiversity conservation and species recovery to include aspects such as clean water and net carbon zero by 2040. The first EFG was launched in May 2022, covering the Hampshire Avon catchment, bringing in several existing clusters up and down the valley. Since then, interest has grown, and there are many different farmer clusters or groups at different stages of development. Keeping up with the level of interest is challenging. At this point, there is a total of 633 farmers across the country that have either joined an EFG or expressed an interest in one. Their holdings cover nearly 315,000 hectares, which is approximately 4% of England's farmed area. The aim is to turn the ambition of these farmers into reality, and the GWCT is now actively working on devising farm-level conservation to be implemented across clusters and environmental farmer groups, aimed at addressing the national goals on habitat provision and species recovery.
Okay, thanks then to Neville. For those of you who know Neville, you'll recognise that wasn't actually his voice. We had to revoice it because the quality of the audio wasn't strong enough, but those were his written words. So thank you very much to Neville. I think that gives us some really interesting background for clusters, and it gives you some idea as to why the Framework project picked up on it as an initiative which we could follow up on. I won't take questions on that now, but I think what you heard there will come in useful and something we might reflect back on when we come to the end to look at the next steps for clusters in Europe. We're now going to move on to...
Hello everybody, my name is Jan. I'm a farmer cluster facilitator, and I would like to tell you the story of our Czech farmer cluster as it has journeyed through the framework.
1 second. The trouble is unfortunately I can't bring up the videos to play without them automatically playing. So apologies for the clunky start there. So what we're going to move on to now are the experiences from just 3 of the 11 clusters that we've had set up in Framework, and then we're going to finish off with one from outside of Framework. I'll attempt to introduce each one as they come along, and we're going to start now with one from Czechia, which is being presented by the facilitator from there, which is Jan Trevesnik.
Project and how it is cultivating biodiversity and community in our region. In the heart of South Moravia, Czech Republic, I have had the privilege to work with a group of farmers who have quietly reshaped the landscape, not just physically, but philosophically. What began as a shared commitment to organic farming has grown into a movement that blends ecological integrity, community engagement, and scientific innovation. The Velké Hostěrádky farmer cluster grew from the pioneering efforts of Martin Hutař, Martin Matěj, and Petr Trávníček, who took over Ekofarma Probio in 2007 with a vision to farm not only organically, but also ethically, with a deep respect for the soil, biodiversity, and the surrounding landscape. Their leadership inspired a wave of conversions across the region, transforming Velké Hostěrádky into a unique bioregion in one of the Czech Republic's driest and warmest areas. Though the farms were informally connected through shared values and practices, it wasn't until the Framework project that their collaboration was formalized. With 9 farms managing over 2,500 hectares of arable land, vineyards, and vegetable fields, the cluster set out to prove that organic farming must go beyond certification. It must be done the right way. Over time, the cluster evolved. Some farms transitioned out, others retired, but 5 core farms remained, managing over 700 hectares, nearly all organically certified. These farms became living laboratories, testing and demonstrating biodiversity-friendly practices that could be replicated across Europe. The cluster's achievements are both practical and poetic. Bird boxes were installed and monitored, with most becoming homes to local species. A 7-kilometer biodiversity path was created, linking farms and offering an interpretive journey through ecological practices now featured on national outdoor recreational maps. The path features 6 educational panels and fruit trees planted along the trail, providing both habitat and learning opportunities. An 8-hectare agroforestry system was planted on erosion-prone land, incorporating fruit and forest species in one of the region's first landscape-scale interventions. Also, the large field blocks were subdivided to improve habitat connectivity, and experimental biocorridors were established in partnership with universities to identify optimal seed mixes for biodiversity. Together with the farmers, we also developed a comprehensive plan to restore grey partridge populations using habitat mapping and restoration tools. Beyond the fields, we embraced citizen science. Visitors were invited to log biodiversity observations using the iNaturalist app, resulting in over 1,300 entries, which is a remarkable achievement for a rural farming landscape. Public events like Crimson Clover and Buckwheat Festival drew hundreds of visitors, blending biodiversity, education with celebration. The biodiversity path became a venue for informal learning, school visits, and nature walks, turning landscape itself into a classroom. Farmer-to-farmer learning was central to our success. More than 20 open field days were held, attracting over 1,000 farmers from across the country. These events featured live demonstrations, field walks, and discussions on agroforestry, biodiversity monitoring, and citizen science. Cluster farmers led many of these sessions themselves, making complex topics accessible and fostering trust among peers. Collaboration with researchers, agronomists, and ecologists enriched the process, and key practices were documented and shared through practice abstracts to encourage wider adoption. Stakeholder engagement was a cornerstone of our journey. Ministries, universities, local businesses, and municipalities all played a role, supporting initiatives like Biodiversity Path and agroforestry systems. Ecofarma Probio served as a regional hub, hosting events, facilitating connections that extended well beyond the farming community. Though the framework project has concluded, its legacy endures. The region has launched a new initiative based on the Living Lab model, focused on biodiversity, climate resilience, and food security. This new phase builds on the relationships, trusts, and practical experience we established through framework. The farmers of Velké Hostěrádky continue to lead, proving that ecological farming is not just sustainable, it's scalable, replicable, and deeply rooted in community. Our story is a testament to what can happen when farmers come together with a shared purpose. We've shown that farming can be a force for ecological restoration, social connection, and scientific progress. And as our fields bloom with clover, buckwheat, and biodiversity, we remind ourselves and others that the future of farming lies not in isolation, but in collaboration.
Okay, so now we're going to move on from Czechia to Spain, where Gonzalo Varath is going to explain something of the Cazador cluster.
The story of the farmer cluster Cazadores de Aguilar is a testament to what happened when two groups farmers and hunters, often seen as separate, unite around a common goal, restoring the life on the land. Back in 2000, when a project focused on agriculture and biodiversity was first proposed, Aguilar stood out, not just for its olive groves, but for the voice of Cristobal Reina, a local olive farmer and president of the Hunting Association. He had long warned of the ecological toll of intensive farming practice, the buried soil, the vanished wildlife, the silence when the bird once sang. In the pursuit of the productivity, spontaneous vegetation had been threatened as an enemy. Herbicides and tractors cleaned every inch of ground behind the trees, leaving little room for anything but olives. But Cristobal saw the potential in the forgotten species. He relied a group of farmers from the Madroño and
Any chat with Rachel?
try it again? Because we did hear you for a second, Graham. The video still doesn't have sound.
Sound.
Today, the Cazadores de Aguilar are more than a cluster. They are a catalyst. Their fields have become living demonstrations, inspiring other farmers to rethink their approach. The shift isn't just philosophical, it is practical.
Could I ask to be certain that everyone on the call could also mute?
Okay.
Thank you.
Ground cover has shown its work is reducing erosion, improving water infiltration, modulating soil temperature, and supporting beneficial insects. It's not just good, for biodiversity, it's good for olives. Perhaps the most profound change is in mindset. Farmers who once saw vegetation as a threat now see it as an ally. The land, once stripped and silent, is beginning to hum again, with insect, bird, and the quiet satisfaction of harvest grown in harmony with the nature. The success in Aguilar de la Frontera offer a hopeful blueprint. It shows that change doesn't require abandoning tradition. It requires remembering it, adapting it, and working together. And it reminds us that sometimes the best way forward is to let the ground speak for itself. Thank you very much.
This is the story of Kanepi-Kihlkond farmer cluster. In the picturesque region in southern Estonia, a transformative agriculture movement has adopted, driven by a collective of 14 farmers and a strong lead, managing over 3,000 hectares of both organic and conventional farmland. These farmers, who raise sheep and cattle and cultivate cereals and animal feed, have united not for financial gain, but out of a shared commitment to restoring biodiversity and protecting native species. Their efforts have focused on wild pollinators and reviving wildflowers, such as the globeflower and the bird's-eye primrose, which are vanishing from Estonian countryside. The initiative faced cultural challenges, particularly in fostering collaboration in a community that values independence. A dedicated facilitator played a pivotal role in bridging the gap between scientific knowledge and relating it to the ecosystem services essential for farming, creating an environment where farmers felt supported and empowered to innovate. This cluster amplifies how ecological awareness and community-driven efforts can lead to the meaningful environmental restoration. Through the project, facilitator and scientists undertook extensive biodiversity monitoring to assess the ecological health of their lands. The project recorded over 75 bird species across more than 100 kilometers of transit counts and identified more than 60 species of wild bees. These efforts were not merely scientific data, the monitoring activities highlighted the importance of integrating scientific data with local knowledge, fostering a sense of ownership and pride among participants. The cluster organized a series of training sessions to equip farmers with practical knowledge and inspire ecological innovation. Events included wildlife photography workshop with Arne Ader and bumblebee identification session led by Professor Eve Veroman. These gatherings provided hands-on learning opportunities and facilitated discussions on ecosystem services, new gap measures, and the use of native wild plant seed mixes. At Kriisa Farm, farmers experimented with sowing wildflower seeds and explored the ecological benefits of herbaceous field edges along with practical use of high naturalist app. These training sessions blended scientific expertise with real-world application, fostering a culture of continuous learning and ecological curiosity. By engaging the experts and peers, farmers expanded their understanding of biodiversity and gained tools to implement sustainable practices on their own farms. Education and outreach have been an important part of the Kanepi-Kihlkond farmer cluster. At Väike-Hauka Organic Farm, high school students were invited to gain insights into sustainable farming and to take part of the nature observation challenges. These activities aim to install ecological awareness in the next generation, highlighting the intricate connections between agriculture and the environment. By learning directly from experienced farmers, students gained a deeper understanding of farming, while scientists deepened their insight into the role of biodiversity in farming. These outreach efforts not only educate youth, but also strengthen community ties and showcase the cluster commitment to the long-term ecological stewardship. The inclusion of educational components ensured that the values of sustainability and biodiversity would continue to resonate beyond the immediate farming community. The influence of Kanepi-Kihlkond farmer cluster extended beyond agricultural practices into the realm of policy. The policy event brought together stakeholders from government ministries, farmer associations and other sectors to address the challenges of balancing productivity with biodiversity. These discussions laid the foundation for future collaboration, with planned roundtables focusing on sustainable waste management and climate-resilient farming. Despite uncertainties about continued facilitation without government support, the cluster's spirit remains strong. Farmers are now more knowledgeable, collaborative, and connected to the land. The initiative stands as a testament to the power of shared vision and ecological commitment. In Kanepi-Kihlkond, biodiversity has always been part of the farming mindset, but today it is no longer just an ideal. It has become a vibrant living presence in the landscape, reflected in every blooming wildflower, buzzing bee, and inspired student.
Hi everyone, and thanks for inviting me to talk about the FAB cluster. My name is Fiona Torrance, and I'm the Farm and Biodiversity Advisor at the Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust in Scotland, and facilitator for the cluster. I'm sorry I can't present live, but I hope this presentation will give you a brief overview of what we've been doing. The Farming Arable Biodiversity Cluster came about after Partridge, an Interreg-funded project which ran from 2016 to 2023 and demonstrated how to increase farmland wildlife by improving agri-environment schemes. Unfortunately, that came to an end, but we wanted to ensure that the great work we had been doing could continue, and so the PepsiCo FAB cluster was developed. This aims to demonstrate how productive agriculture does not need to suffer for good environmental stewardship. It is funded through the PepsiCo Positive Agricultural Output Fund and currently has funding up until this year, with plans to continue in 2026. The cluster is unusual in its structure, with the 6 farms within it spread across Fife and Angus rather than typically connected within the landscape. Although this means we are unable to achieve the landscape scale benefits of a conventional cluster, it does mean we are able to test measures in different locations, communicate with a larger group of stakeholders, and work together with other industry organisations. As you can see from the map, the farms are spread out across eastern Scotland. Balgony, which is marked in yellow, was one of the original Partridge demonstration sites and continues to serve this purpose within the FAB cluster. The other 5 farms are known as pilot farms, who do not have the same level of extensive habitat, but who we are helping to prepare for the next round of agri-environment schemes in Scotland, whenever they are announced. Each pilot farm has established a small amount of high-quality habitat of their choosing, and we undertake monitoring as well as providing habitat management advice. So what have we actually been doing? Well, as I mentioned previously, Balgony acts as a demonstration site within the cluster, and this allows us to bring farmers, policymakers, and other industry stakeholders to the site and show them what can be achieved if the appropriate package of measures are available. In addition, we are also monitoring breeding birds, grey partridges, and invertebrates to see what effect the habitats we are establishing on local wildlife populations. Communication is also a large part of the cluster, both with the participating farmers, but also with other industry stakeholders. This is achieved through running farm walks, attending events, production of blogs, videos, and other social media content. A further aspect we have had the opportunity to be involved in is testing NatureScot's new habitat assessment scorecards and app, and I'll cover more on this shortly. This year we entered a new phase and secured funding to provide habitat to 50 farms across Scotland. Each farm selected mixes from a list to minimise complexity and were provided with enough seed to cover 2 hectares of land. They will be provided with feeders to help songbirds during the winter months and have also been given some assistance for identifying species. Something which has been a bit different has been the opportunity to participate in NatureScot scorecard testing. As NatureScot look to quantify and assess habitats present across Scotland, they're developing a number of tools that can be used by farmers and other land managers to identify habitats, as well as opportunities for environmental works in the future. One of these is the Farm BioScot app. The testing has comprised of 3 parts: testing the scorecards used to assess each habitat, the habitat mapping protocol, and how these function within the app itself, which we are undertaking at the moment. This has allowed us to make suggestions on wording, functionality, and how the habitats are assessed, some of which have been incorporated. The farmers have enjoyed being part of this process and feel valued that their feedback has been taken on board. Before I'd finish, I'd quickly like to thank the partners in the cluster, particularly PepsiCo for funding it and the farmers for taking part. It's been great to work with NatureScot on testing the scorecards, and Kingdon Farming, who farm Balgony, have done a great job of managing the different habitats there. I'd also like to thank Frontier and Scottish Agronomy for providing agronomical advice and support with the scaling up part of the project. Thanks very much for listening, everyone. If anyone has any questions, then please feel free to contact me. Alternatively, you can find more information about the FAB cluster on the website, which can be accessed by scanning the QR code you can see. Thank you.
Okay, testing. Not that one.
Okay, I think this is Jake or Thomas. I see. Right, trying again. Jake or Thomas. Thumbs up if you can hear me without echo.
Yes, I can hear.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jake. Thanks very much. Okay. All right. So that brings us to the end of the session on the farmer clusters. Now we're running late for the obvious technical problems that we've had, but I want to give just a few minutes over to taking questions from across those, if there are any, and I certainly have a couple of my own. So we have representatives from various clusters with us. So I'm just wondering if anybody on the call has any questions about specifics to the presenters, or in general on those cluster experiences. Are there any questions from the audience? Certainly. I can actually see everyone. Sorry, Jake. Yes, carry on.
A little bit of interruption on the Spanish one. Did anybody watch it beforehand to know what the benefits were to the olives of the process of inter-row planting? I can see biodiversity, a great improvement, but at one point somebody said, "Oh well, it improves the olives." Now, whether that was in yield or water retention or what, I wasn't sure. Was there any clarification of that anybody could give?
So personally, I can tell you that it's made a great benefit to erosion control in the areas. Once I've actually been there myself, and you can see enormous gullies and areas of the olive groves really quite damaged through erosion, runoff causing big gullies and all the rest of it. And the cover cropping has been a great advantage to that. So that's one thing. So that's sort of physical process, binding of the soil surface. Whether they've yet identified a benefit of the biodiversity in terms of yield or quality to their olives, I can't tell you yet. We had a report on that. So I'm looking at Neve, who's run that body of work within the project, and she says they've not reported on that yet.
Right. Any mention on pollination? That must have been massively improved.
So Neve, would you like to?
So the analysis that we did showed that bumblebee levels in particular were very low across the cluster and control sites. We think maybe with more time we might see a bigger increase, but they were starting from a very low point. We only had 3 years of monitoring data. So we haven't seen any increases yet.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much. That's my last question.
Thank you, Jake. Any other questions from the floor? Isabella, I see your hands up.
Okay, can you hear me?
Can do now.
Yes. Thank you for the presentation. It was interesting to see some insight from the cluster. And I was wondering, I understood that finding funding from one cluster to another is different. And does all the cluster found some funding for the future?
No, I don't believe that they all have. I think it's the case where exceptionally some have funding for the future, and that's one of the things that I think might come up in the final discussion for today, which is a discussion of the next steps, because we've had, I think I'm right in saying, I think it's true that we've universally for all 11 clusters, they're keen to continue. And that's even true for those that started off from a relatively low base of interest and motivation. We'll come on to that in a later presentation. So we have the willingness, but actually identifying the funding has been a significant challenge. And one thing that I think if we go back to the very first presentation, where we hear even in the English setting where clusters are pretty well developed, that there's a transition from public funding through government sources to private independent funding subsequently, which I think is an interesting feature to note. Is there another question from the floor?
This one from Tracy. How do clusters differ from landscape recovery projects? She's got a hand.
Tracy, would you like to put the question yourself?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Hi. Yes, so I'm a Dartmoor Hill farmer. We are in the sort of initial phases of potentially putting together or being involved with a landscape recovery project. And I'm just wondering what the similarities and differences are between clusters and landscape recovery, because at the moment it seems very similar, but obviously the titles are different.
Okay.
We have similar issues with public and private finances.
So for the landscape recovery program that you're talking about, is that a specific scheme within England? That is.
Yes, so that's a government idea from the Elms.
Okay. From the Elms, okay. All right. So I mean, so technically, I can't answer your question as to what the difference is, because it depends on the specification of that particular scheme as to whether it would embody, whether it would allow the funding of what a cluster actually is. So the key features of a cluster are that they are farmer-led, that they're a collective action. There's an attempt to have them locally coordinated, so tend to be neighbouring, although that's not always the case, and have freedom to set their own objectives. Now, if those things, those key characteristics are possible within the scheme that you talk about, then perhaps it's possible to actually have a cluster funded under that scheme. But it would depend on the specifics of that scheme. Now, I don't know that scheme because we're working. Well, I'm either working in Scotland, which is a different set of schemes, or Europe, but not England. And need from GWCT in England.
I think landscape recovery is more top down. I don't think it funds facilitation, so that's probably the key difference.
Okay, did you hear that, Tracy?
Top down, but we're having conversations about it being bottom up now.
Okay, well that sounds really good.
That's a change.
Yeah, and one of the key things that Neve just mentioned that I didn't say is one of the key things for the clusters is a facilitation funding that will allow you to employ a facilitator. Yeah.
Yes, I think it's all very, very similar. Just looking at it from what you guys are doing. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's something that we'll be keen to find out more about. So thank you for the pointer.
Okay. Thank you.
Now there will be a chance to discuss things further later and even after the webinar. But I think we should move on now because we are running late. So let me discover where the next file is on Beatrix's laptop. Take it. Think of it. Done that, so we should now be on to see on your screen.
Gone quiet again, Graham.
Gone quiet.
Called landscape lead.
The English version of our guidelines have had over 1,200 views to date, and they cover a range of topics from how to help start a farmer cluster to how to communicate the activities on your farmer cluster, and also how to monitor. And search for guidelines. It will bring you through to the Zenodo website where all of the guidelines are available to download in the different languages I've mentioned. Our first guideline provides an overview of farmer clusters, and this is really aimed at the general public. So it provides a layman's description of farmer clusters and highlights their importance, how they originated, and examples of successful farmer clusters in England where they originated. You can then move on to our successfully establish, monitor, and run new farmer clusters. And this is because we wanted to reach farmers beyond the farmer clusters we were working with under the project. So to do this, we created two main sets of resources aimed to help establish and run farmer clusters. The first was a series of guidelines which were produced in 8 different languages. And secondly, we had our online training course which helped with the establishment of new farmer clusters, and this is called Landscape Leaders. The English version of our guidelines have had over 1,200 views to date, and they cover a range of topics from how to help start a farmer cluster to how to communicate the activities on your farmer cluster, and also how to monitor biodiversity. And as I've just said, they're available in a range of languages, including English, French, Spanish, German, Dutch, Estonian, Czech, and Italian. And you can access the guidelines through our information hub called Recodo. So if you go through to the resource finder and search for guidelines, it will bring you through to the Zenodo website where all of the guidelines are available to download in the different languages I've mentioned. Our first guideline provides an overview of farmer clusters, and this is really aimed at the general public. So it provides a layman's description of farmer clusters and highlights their importance, how they originated, and examples of successful farmer clusters in England where they originated. You can then move on to our starting a farmer cluster guideline, and this guideline highlights the 15 key steps to starting a farmer cluster, so it really covers the main actions involved. Our Managing a Farmer Cluster guide is for new and established farmer clusters. So the focus of this is on the role of the facilitator, their key tasks, so for example, running regular meetings, organising training events, and creating the group's public profile. It also describes how facilitators can build success for their farmer clusters, and we identify common facilitation challenges and discuss ways to overcome these. Our farmer cluster communication guideline is designed to highlight the advantages of communicating, so both internally and externally. So internally for keeping members up to date with what's going on and encouraging knowledge exchange, and externally to try to build regional momentum and advertise farmer cluster businesses. This guideline also covers methods of communication, so from traditional media to social media. We also look at how you can reach a range of different audiences and different resources available and approaches to communicating. Our Monitoring Biodiversity Guideline draws on our experience in developing scientific monitoring protocols through the Framework project, and it also explores how monitoring could be conducted by farmer cluster facilitators or farmers. It covers a broad range of topics, including why surveying biodiversity is important, how often you should survey, which species you could survey, who can conduct the monitoring, and how can the monitoring be conducted. Our last guideline focuses on the importance of engagement with a range of different stakeholders, from local communities to policymakers. From a community engagement perspective, we describe existing community engagement initiatives in the UK, so for example, Open Farm Sunday, and also Europe-wide schemes such as the City Nature Challenge. And these have all been implemented on our network of farmer clusters during the Framework project. We also provide community engagement case studies which showcase examples of implementation of these initiatives, so including the City Nature Challenge in Luxembourg. Finally, policymakers are an extremely important group to engage with if your aim is to make more widespread policy changes. We draw on the project's experiences of policymaker interactions through Framework, outlining the importance of engagement on the ground, for example, through farm walks. Another training focus has been the development of the Farmer Cluster training package, Landscape Leaders. The course curriculum design is informed by our experience in the Framework farmer clusters, drawing from the learnings of our facilitators, as well as relevant resources, including tools and media content produced by the project. The course is designed for anyone who's interested in exploring the world of farmer clusters and the issues they can respond to. So you'll find this course particularly useful if you're a new farm advisor or if you're a farmer learning about farm management for biodiversity. By the end of the course, you should be able to appreciate the context surrounding farmer clusters, understand the ethos behind their success, navigate common obstacles farmer clusters face, describe select biodiversity monitoring approaches, also describe select habitat management approaches, and learn how to communicate to build momentum. And you can access the Landscape Leaders training course through our information hub, Rukodo, where it's listed as a key resource. Combined, these materials provide a foundation for effective farmer cluster management, helping facilitators to build trust, structure meetings, and support biodiversity-friendly farming. And we hope that many of you listening will access these resources and try using them yourselves.
Okay, moving on then from the training material, Eszter Cantu Salazar from LIST
In farmer clusters, it is always easy to show that actions such as flower strips, habitat creation, or reducing pesticides are really making a difference. Monitoring provides evidence of impact, and it also gives farmers motivation and credibility, showing that their efforts matter. In Framework, we developed a range of resources for and around biodiversity monitoring. These include harmonized methods across clusters, such as pollinator transects, span traps, vegetation plots, and bird surveys. Another key output is the Frame BMP score prototype, a scoring tool with drop-down menus, auto-calculated scores, and worked examples. It helps compare monitoring methods by effort, ease of use, cost, or environmental impact, and is now also integrated into FEAST. These resources provide a menu of tested protocols, from simple entry-level options to more advanced. The key point is that monitoring is not just a scientific exercise. It is a practical tool that helps farmers track results, adapt their practices, and communicate success, and it's a key part of cluster credibility. Further resources and detailed outputs are available in the Zenodo repository, in the deliverable reports, and in FEAST. Together, they support farmer clusters in choosing suitable methods and showing the impact of their actions.
Now we're going to hear from John Silvakis about the decision support tool that we've developed.
I'm Dr. John Silvakis from the University of Hertfordshire in the UK, and I'm going to give you a very rapid overview of the FEAST software. Now, the FEAST software covers a broad range of functions. I'm not going to be able to show them all today, but essentially it allows you to perform a number of functions, including performance assessment, mapping, access to planning and guidance, and biodiversity monitoring. Now, the best way to sort of show you this is to open up a case study, and we're going to do that. And we're going to explore one from the Czech Republic, which was one of the framework clusters. Now, this particular farm, they were interested in introducing grey partridges onto the farm, and they tried to do this and it wasn't successful. They all died essentially, and so they wanted to try and get a better understanding of why this happened. So we're going to use the FEAST tool to try and understand the relative strengths and weaknesses of the farm and the farmland landscape to try and diagnose what the issues may have been, and then identify some options to perhaps improve the chances of a successful reintroduction in the future. So first of all, we need to think about, well, we're interested in grey partridges, so we selected grey partridges as our indicator here. There are almost well over 70 indicator species in the FEAST software now. We're adding more as time goes on. First of all, let's open up the location of where the farm is. So here we can see the landscape in the middle here. It's an arable farm. And when we click on this here, we can see the features we've identified on that map. Now, the first thing we can do is we can say, well, let's have a look at what the grey partridge needs. So we've got a list of 10 indicators here, and we can see down the right hand side whether they're available or not, and 2 of them aren't. So we've got a range of sort of nesting, forage, chick and cover indicators, and we can see there's no forage seeds available in the winter there, and there's no structure for chicks in June. So immediately, without even doing any sophisticated analysis, it's telling us these are fundamentally missing. If we scroll down the report, and I'll come right down to the bottom, and I'll expand this into a bigger window so you can see that better. We can now see, if we come right down here, it's for these different 10 sort of habitat requirements. We've got a list of things that could be implemented to try and actually address those shortages. So if we look at seeds winter, we can come down to there, and we can see it's suggesting a number of things that could be to do with hedgerows, arable lands, land blocks. So it might be that we need to put on winter stubbles, and there's links through to guidance like winter stubbles that we can click on, and you can see it opens up a page that tells us all about winter stubbles and how we might be able to implement those. So that's given us an idea of what we need to implement. The next question might be, well, we know what we need to do, but where do we need to do it? So if we come back up the report here, we can see this little Venn diagram. If I click on that, that's to identify optimal zones where essentially the 8 habitats that are available, where they overlap, and so perhaps where we want to create the habitats to create the 2 that are missing. And we can see that the dark red areas, which fortunately cover most of the farm, are where all 8 habitats currently exist, and so that gives us an idea of where we want to do. So we've got an idea of what we want to do, and now we know where. So let's see if we can change something and see if it makes a difference. So I'm just going to pick one of the fields here. It's an arable field, and that opens up the window down here that allows me to edit the data. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in winter stubbles. So as we said, that might be able to fix. But I'm also going to, because on the chicks we're having a problem probably with some predators, so I'm going to put licensed predator removal in as well. So I'm now going to save that. That's then now going to recalculate, and now we can see all the boxes tick. So essentially unlock the landscape in terms of what is needed for the grey partridge. The next thing to do is assess, well, how well is that landscape performing in terms of what's available and where it is. And this is where we can do a spatial habitat suitability assessment. So I'm going to click on the calculate button here. Now what it's doing now is looking at all the different features that are on the landscape here, how far apart they are, how well connected they are there any barriers, what sort of distance they are in relation to the distance and the foraging range of the grey partridge, and it's calculating an assessment based on for the suitability of the grey partridge. And what it's done here, it's categorized everything. So if I put the categorization up, we can immediately see we've got a range from 0 through to 4 in this instance, still relatively low numbers, but we can immediately see the strengths and weaknesses in the landscape. So obviously where we created it here, we've got some strengths, but clearly we made no changes down in the southeast here, so there's been no improvement there. If we go back to the report, we can also look at a table here which gives us the sort of area of the different habitats that grey partridge needs, and we can see some have got some significance of the total area of the farm, some in the teens and 20s, but some are still very low, sort of 2.7, 3.4, 2.1, and realistically what we want is really sort of 7-10% upwards to provide enough habitat for the grey partridge. So it may well be that what we need to do is make more changes, maybe adding more winter stubbles, maybe adding conservation headlands around the farm, increasing the areas of those which we're perhaps lacking at the moment. So what FEAST has done, it's able to identify the strengths and weaknesses in the landscape. It's then worked out what you might be able to do about it and where you should perhaps implement options. What it can also do is give you guidance on, well, do you want to see if it's making a difference when you implement those options? So it can give you links through to monitoring methods. So it's here suggesting the breeding bird survey. And so it gives you a link on a page here which tells you a bit about the method in terms of how easy it is to do, the various cost of doing that survey and what have you, links through to the breeding bird survey website, so you can find out more about it there as well. So again, signposting the user to useful information. Then hopefully what we'll find over time is when you then do start monitoring the birds on the farm, we might start finding they start to appear, and this is where we can bring in monitoring data. And I've just switched on for all birds here, so you can see the various birds that have been observed around and on the farm, and if you click on any one of these it will show you the various bird species that have been observed. And again, you can sort of open up any of these to get a little bit of information about that species here on GBIF. That's a very rapid overview of what FEAST can do. I hope you found it interesting. There's a lot more information on the FEAST website and lots of videos as well on how to use it, and of course you can download the tool yourself as well for free to use it yourself. Thank you for your time.
Okay, so that brings us to the end of that session where we saw some of the resource tools that have been developed as part of the framework project. So again, let's take a few moments to see whether anybody in the audience has any questions about those, and whether there's more insight that you would like. Any questions, anyone? Tracy, yeah.
Sorry, just a basic question. How much of the you might not know the answer to this, how much is the landscape cluster courses, please?
Yes, so the thing that was described with the courses, etc., that's all free. So the guidance, the course, and so on is just free. Yeah?
Great.
And we've got links. We've got links to those that'll be provided through the webinar, but it's also accessible via the platform that we host, which is recodo.io.
Recodo. Sorry, I'm looking. IO.
.io, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So all our project resources are accessible via there, but we've got links, QR codes, and so on coming up later in the webinar that'll help everybody get to those should you need to.
Okay, and FEAST just said, I'm just clarifying, you just need to look that up and you should be able to access.
You'll also be able to access that. It's got its own page on Recodo, so you'll be able to access that too. So we'll have the links for everything.
You got the links for everything. That's great.
Yeah. The general thing, if you go to recodo.io and look for the resources, that's
great. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. And Neve has just said that she's putting links to the course in the chat.
She's doing what?
Okay. Any other? She's putting the links to the course in the chat, to the Teams chat here. So that will pop up shortly. Okay, lovely. Any other questions, anyone? I'm interested. I've got a question to the audience in general. So I hope you might be able to offer up your ideas. And that is, you know, we had an opportunity to produce some resources, but we couldn't do everything that we thought was important and relevant. So I'm just wondering, from experiences of mostly, you know, farmers or people in practice, in attempting to do these sorts of things, set up clusters, what type of resources do you really look to have, which you gain advantage from having? What are the things that you think, oh, I wish I knew how to do something, or I wish I had a tool to allow me to do something? It's just really interesting to know what you think the things are that are missing and that would be valuable to you. Does anyone have a view on that? If you do, please shout up, because I can't actually see everybody. Tracy again. Tracy, please step in.
Sorry. I think maybe some more, if it is possible, set up some meetings with the farm clusters, if it is something that could be done, because it's a totally different area, but it's interesting to hear how they've dealt with things, maybe, so people can bounce ideas off each other, possibly.
So access networking for first-hand experience.
Yes,
okay.
Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Okay.
So that's something we attempted to really try and facilitate. But on what, and it's nice to hear that at least from yourself, and you know, I don't doubt that you reflect other people's opinions as well. That networking would be a valuable thing. Okay, so that's something that we can bear in mind. Obviously, the framework is coming to an end in just a few days, so we can't implement it in framework. But we have got resources there that might allow you to link through. So, in fact, on the Recodo website, we have connected the farmers from our farmer cluster with their own page onto that, and it's the sort of thing that could be, you know, an online platform like that might be a useful way to make connections in the first place. Be it then the need to follow up with discussions and first-hand conversation would be really useful as well, no doubt. Okay,
Yeah,
thanks, Tracy.
definitely.
That's useful. Does anybody else have?
Sorry, maybe even some visit. I know that's a big reach, but sometimes setting up some visits, you know, seeing the real thing, that sort of thing. But that's a big thing, and you're not a travel company, but yeah.
no, but for various projects we have run you know, cross group meetings and even international meetings from one place to another for farmers. So we do know that they are valued.
Yes, definitely, absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much for your input, Tracy. I appreciate that. Okay, I don't see any more hands or any more questions. So what I'm going to do now is try and seamlessly start the next session, but bear with me because it probably will do the same thing that it did last time. So just 1 second. So now what we're going to do is have 3 dovetail presentations looking at the achievements and challenges that we have faced, which I've now got up, but I now need to share the screen so everybody else can see. 1 second. Process. Share. Include sound. That's off there already. That. It's crossed. No sound. No, it's not playing.
What they have achieved and what we have learned. First, I'll reflect on how framework clusters have evolved across Europe before I hand over to my colleagues who will present some sustainability and biodiversity outcomes. And then I will finish off with some social outcomes the clusters have achieved and some conclusions and ways forward. So how have framework farmer clusters evolved? The 11 clusters have been established across Europe, from Scotland in the north to southern Spain and to Estonia in the east. All of them can be conceptualized as collaborative groups that aim to improve environmental outcomes at the landscape scale, taking a bottom-up and quite a flexible approach to reflect local conditions. The clusters cover a diversity of geographies. Some clusters cover farms that are geographically neighboring, such as seen on the map in the Estonian case. Some farms are dispersed in the landscape, such as in the Czech cluster. The clusters cover different farming systems, including arable, mixed farming, vegetables and orchards. In addition, they cover a great diversity in starting conditions when clusters have been started. For example, the English farmer cluster was established under quite favorable conditions due to the experiences with farmer clusters over a decade and a strong network of cluster facilitators in England. In contrast, it took quite some time and considerable effort to establish the Estonian and the Czech cluster due to the post-socialist context where farmers are quite reluctant to collaborate. These reflections and discussions about why do some farmer clusters work a lot better than other clusters led us to explore the factors that shape the development and the outcomes of farmer clusters. Based on an in-depth analysis of all framework clusters, we identified 5 factors that we called formative dimensions that shape farmer cluster trajectories. These are governance, the structures and processes set up to support farmer cluster activities; leadership, the presence of a person, for example, a lead farmer, or an organization supporting farmer cluster activities and outcomes. Third, facilitation, the role of the cluster facilitator or the facilitating team for supporting cluster activities and outcomes. Fourth, the group characteristics that may support or challenge cluster activities. And finally, the context, including the economic, cultural, social and political context within which each farmer cluster operates. In practice, these 5 dimensions are dynamic, they are interdependent and they influence each other and shape each cluster's trajectory and maturity, as illustrated in the kite diagram on the right, showing that each cluster is on a different development pathway, on a different level of maturity across all those 5 dimensions that I just explained. So farmer clusters
Attention please, attention please. The fire alarm system test is about to commence.
Existing experiences.
Fire alarm
Others
system
face
test is
cultural
about
and
to
structural
commence.
barriers. And understanding these differences is key to interpreting their achievements.
As discussed before, our farmer clusters comprised a wide range of different farming systems across huge geographic areas. And one of the main goals of Framework was to design methodologies for capturing changes in biodiversity across these landscapes, principally in response to farmer cluster management. And key to this was identifying biodiversity indicators that communicated the status of the environment at the landscape scale. These biodiversity indicators were not necessarily the target species of farmer cluster management, but they acted as proxies by which the overall landscape scale biodiversity could be assessed over the course of the project. An initial list of indicators was drawn up by the project partners through a literature review, and then these were narrowed down through an evaluation process and constant feedback loop. And this involved project partners, facilitators, and biodiversity experts in a step-by-step elimination process to determine the final set of indicators for the project. This resulted in the following list of core indicators, which were farmland birds, pollinators, specifically bumblebees and butterflies, and also plant species. And these are all taxa that we would expect to respond to management changes at the landscape scale. To understand if the habitat management activities targeted to address the specific aims of our FRAMEwork cluster have had wider impacts on these farm and biodiversity indicators, a before-after control impact experimental design was implemented where possible. So this was possible on 10 of our 11 FRAMEwork clusters, and the FRAMEwork cluster areas were paired with control areas of the same farming system type, approximately 2 kilometres from each FRAMEwork cluster. This before-after control impact, or BACI approach, was used as it's considered more robust than simpler experimental designs. And in the context of our study, the BACI design compared trends in biodiversity on treatment versus control sites before and after FRAMEwork cluster biodiversity measures were implemented. However, in England, the Cranbourne Chase FRAMEwork cluster instead followed a before-after study design. And this was due to the high density of FRAMEwork clusters surrounding the English case study. This meant that selecting a control site near the FRAMEwork cluster was not possible, and a higher level of replication was therefore required on the FRAMEwork cluster to generate similar results to the BACI design. For our analysis, each biodiversity indicator was analysed individually and separately for each FRAMEwork cluster. This was using a series of generalised linear mixed effects models in the BACI models to test the interaction effect of time before or after and treatment, FRAMEwork cluster or control on biodiversity indicators. And in the English case study, we looked at the effect of time only, so before or after the intervention. And I think it's important to say at this point that FRAMEwork cluster management was really variable across the FRAMEwork clusters. And this is because we covered a range of different farming systems, climates and farm sizes. And you can see this described here in the table. So FRAMEwork clusters had different conservation interests, and therefore different habitat management strategies were designed to help them achieve the specific goals that they'd set out. In terms of key findings, across bird, butterfly, bumblebee and pantrap invertebrates, community responses to the FRAMEwork cluster management were highly variable. Some FRAMEwork clusters demonstrated benefits for particular taxa. For instance, the Moosviertel and Burgenland FRAMEwork clusters in Austria focused their management efforts on increasing vegetation diversity. And this showed positive impacts on butterfly abundance and richness, whereas other taxonomic groups at these sites did not differ significantly between FRAMEwork cluster and control areas. Although I should probably say that the vegetation data has not been analysed yet. In contrast, FRAMEwork clusters such as the Torrance FRAMEwork cluster in France recorded declines across multiple groups on both control and FRAMEwork cluster areas, for example in butterflies and pantrap invertebrates. And they also recorded contrasting increases across several bird indices, including total bird abundance, total bird richness, and farmland bird abundance. These kind of patterns, which were the same on control and FRAMEwork cluster sites, are more indicative of wider environmental pressures than local management, because changes took place on both the FRAMEwork cluster and control areas. Responses were also seen to diverge within the same FRAMEwork cluster. For example, on the Buchan and Cranbourne Chase FRAMEwork clusters, several of our bird indicators increased, but on both FRAMEwork clusters, butterflies declined, and this was in line with national trends. The final year of our study, 2024, was one of the worst years on records for butterflies in the UK, and our findings indicate that a targeted approach to management of these species is needed to offset these larger declines. However, there are some important caveats to our results that I should mention. Firstly, the study duration, which was only a 3 to 5 year monitoring period, limits our ability to assess longer-term trends. Despite this, our results represent a really important step in identifying whether FRAMEwork cluster management can influence biodiversity. Extending data collection over future years is recommended, and this would provide stronger evidence of whether observed patterns represent short-term fluctuations or persistent trajectories. We also note that the targeted interventions trialled within some FRAMEwork clusters demonstrate that well-designed management can benefit specific taxa, even if this doesn't necessarily translate into short-term broader biodiversity benefits across all groups. Such benefits may require more time to emerge and could be more apparent in taxa that weren't included within the scope of this study. Looking ahead, the results presented here can be used to help inform the development of indicators for the Nature Restoration Plan and also guide future biodiversity strategies at both national and regional levels. Our results demonstrate that farmer clusters can make a difference, but they also highlight that wider biodiversity recovery will require time, greater landscape scale coordination, and strategic alignment to deliver benefits across multiple species groups. Importantly, our findings show that benefits for target species groups do not necessarily extend to broader biodiversity gains, and this has implications for the Nature Restoration Plan, which relies on monitoring specific species groups such as pollinators and farmland birds, and this may risk overlooking wider community responses.
During the framework project, we developed a practitioner-friendly sustainability assessment tool. Although there are several agricultural sustainability assessment tools available, many of these are very data-heavy, or they look at a singular aspect of sustainability, such as just the greenhouse gas emissions that a farm releases. There are very few practitioner-friendly sustainability assessment tools available that not only capture the sustainability level or direction of a farm, but that also provide practical steps a farmer could take to improve their overall sustainability, and that was what we ended up aiming to create here. We began by conducting a detailed sustainability analysis of the Cranbourne Chase farmer cluster in England. This required a detailed questionnaire and indicator calculations made to identify indicators that were performing above or below what we would expect an average farm to be at. However, we wanted a simpler, more streamlined final version that was more practitioner-friendly. To do this, we needed to identify what data was driving each indicator result and simplify the questionnaire around just capturing that piece of information. We constructed the streamlined questionnaire in a multiple choice format, making it quick to complete, but also providing simple steps farmers could take to then improve. We sent this streamlined questionnaire to all the arable and mixed farmer clusters in the framework project and received completed questionnaires from 4 of them. This table shows the overall scores for each farmer cluster, averaged across all the farms within it and all the indicators we tested within our questionnaire. From this, you can see that the farmer cluster in Scotland was the lowest score, closest to that of a control farm, which we would have set at 50% in our analysis. But still moving in a positive direction, it is close to 60%, and 70% was our sustainable level. However, the other 3 were moving in a very positive direction, over 70% scores, placing them at sustainable and continually improving. Here you can see a more detailed breakdown of the results for each indicator within each farmer cluster. Specific indicators did well across the board. Governance, specifically due diligence and stakeholder dialogue, scored highly, suggesting there is strong farmer engagement in this area, which is encouraging as these show good working practices and engagement with staff and stakeholders. Secondly, material use scored well, and this included the pesticides use indicators. So there was very low levels of glyphosate being used and no insecticide sprays throughout the spring and summer. Although this is promising, it doesn't always directly lead to immediate effects in biodiversity outcomes. There might be a delay, or other factors might also be coming into play. Ecosystem diversity was lower, but still positive. However, the breakdown of results showed it due to very low levels of semi-natural habitats and woody vegetation across the farmer clusters, as well as little to no engagement in agroforestry or silvopasture. Finally, there was a very wide variation in the financial dependence scores. This was linked to the removal of basic payments in the UK. Overall, we have some positive findings from the preliminary results, as well as areas we can suggest farmer clusters look into to try and improve to make their overall system more sustainable, as the pillar representation shows how when we start to crumble in one area, it destabilizes the whole system. In conclusion, the tool proved practical and insightful. The multiple choice statements made it quick to complete, but also provided steps farmers could take to improve their sustainability. You can see the example of water quality in the table below. The practitioner-friendly version provides a simple traffic light colour system for the results, which is demonstrated by the table on the right. So it is easy for farmers or a farmer cluster facilitator to identify what areas need work in the most. Finally, our main takeaway lesson learned from this whole experience was the timing of the questionnaires. That is perhaps one thing we would do differently if we were to redo the experiment.
Now I will turn to some of the social outcomes using the Spanish and the Italian clusters as illustrative examples of how these clusters have been shaped by local cultural and biophysical context. On the top you can see the Spanish farmer cluster, where olive plantations have been extensively managed for over half a decade, and soil erosion and habitat loss provide major challenges, since the cultural norms about what constitutes good olive grove management has prevented the re-establishment of ground cover in these orchards, which the framework project could address. In the Italian farmer cluster, which also focuses on olive production, that cluster faces challenges around the extensification of olive production and land abandonment, as well as differences in farmer perception about how to manage pests such as the olive fruit fly, which framework could also successfully address over the life of the project. Similarly, in the arable, mixed and grassland clusters, they differ in significant way, as I already hinted earlier in the presentation, based on their different dynamic trajectories of the 5 formative dimensions, which is also reflected in some of the biodiversity outcomes that the farmer clusters could achieve over the life of the framework project. So now turning to some of the social outcomes around identity transformation gained from our longitudinal research in year 1 and year 4 carried out in some of the farmer clusters. We found that farmer clusters can foster mutual learning, trust and identity transformation in farmers. Farmers shift their roles from business operators to environmental stewards, community leaders and educators. Facilitators act as trust brokers, connect farmers to funding and to knowledge. Peer exchange drives motivation and lasting behavioral change. So farmer clusters are more than just groups of farmers, they are evolving communities, learning communities, and their success depends on trust, shared learning and local relevance. So to conclude, the farmer clusters have achieved measurable progress in sustainability, biodiversity and social transformation. Their maturity and context-sensitive evolution offers a realistic frame for future efforts. The tools and the insights that we gain from framework can guide new farmer clusters and inform policy. However, continued support, adaptation and knowledge exchange are essential. So the journey of these farmer clusters shows what is possible when collaboration is nurtured. So let's build on this foundation. Thank you very much for joining us and for listening. More resources and contact details, please visit our website.
Okay, so that concludes that particular session. Apologies that I didn't introduce each section that came along, but we had the fire alarm, which I believe go off in the middle of it, so we couldn't unmute here. I think what's interesting about those presentations is that we see that both in terms of biodiversity, the social effects, and then more generally in terms of sustainability, what we might expect clusters are able to achieve in the long term. And we already saw progression over such a short time frame as was feasible to study within this particular project. Off the back of that, does anybody have any questions or any particular comments from the audience regarding the sort of bigger picture stuff that we've just seen? Alex, you've a hand up.
Yeah, there was a reference to timing of questionnaires. So I was just wondering what was learnt about the timing questionnaires.
So let me ask Rachel, who's on the call, who I think that really relates to the sustainability questionnaire. Rachel, can you address Alex's question directly for us?
Yeah, I'm here. So I think that the
you're quite quiet, Rachel.
Can you not hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
a bit louder. Other work packages also had lots of questionnaires for the farmer clusters, and I think we sent out our detailed questionnaire a bit too late, and it would have been better to be more aware of what other work packages were also dealing with, and therefore combine our questionnaires earlier on in the process before farmers got a bit fatigued by having to respond to questions all the time. So I think that was our key takeaway, really.
So it was more timing in the life of the project rather than timing in the farming year or the calendar year.
Yeah, we always try to send the questionnaires to the farmers at their quietest time of year for the cluster. So, or we gave it to the facilitator, and the facilitator would wait until a good time in the year for the farmers to respond to it. But yeah, it was definitely, I think, just not timed well enough with the other questionnaires that were going out and needed to be better coordinated from our side.
Yes, so if you like, Alex, that's sort of a project-specific issue. You know, if we're running clusters out in a different setting, you might not have these problems. Whereas when it's embedded within a sort of wider project setting, there's lots of other things going on that we're trying to coordinate and align. You know, so that adds a little to the complexity and complications, which might actually be not such a problem, even if we're just focusing on developing clusters as an initiative in a country, for example. Does anybody else have any questions? Shout out if you do, because I can't see everybody. I've got a question for some of our colleagues. If we just trying to see who's still on the call from across the framework clusters. I was interested to see or hear if there was anybody who had any particularly unexpected outcomes what they did. You know, were there any achievements or any successes they thought, we really hadn't expected that after they've been through the process? Is there anybody who has anything such as that to offer up? Surely it can't all have been just entirely as anticipated at the beginning of the project. I wonder, Ross McLean. Oh, Jake, you have your hand up. Yes, Jake?
I wonder how any successes were communicated to communities and whether that could be celebrated. I mean, there are open farm days and things like that, but do the local communities actually know or care what the clusters are doing?
I think that's a really good point. We did make some efforts to try and encourage clusters to not just connect with, let's call them the more structured elements of the system, but the communities that surround them. So the paths, for example, that were put in place, inviting local schools to come along to run BioBlitzes and so on. So there were efforts that were made like that. Neve, I'm going to ask you, can you think of a particular example that we would offer up to Jake as a good example of where the communities were engaged, and we really saw an example of the value being shared or shown or communicated?
So I think several of the farmer clusters hosted events with local schools. And I think that was quite important, you know, for the next generation as well, to understand the different contributions that farmers can make. So kind of in terms of food production, but also in terms of environmental care. And I think that was, yeah, probably one of the best examples. So several clusters to use towards.
Yeah. So so did you hear that, Jay? Yes. So the schools were.
Yeah.
And that's something with our Buchan cluster in Scotland that we're looking to continue because there's a local primary school that is situated right next to one of the cluster farms, and they're keen to encourage them to sort of come along and see what's going on. It's not always the easiest thing to organise because of the limitations that the schools face, but I think that's a good route. The other thing, another good example I would put forward is for the Luxembourg cluster, that there was a cider producer who was quite instrumental in coordinating what was going on, and they were always very keen to open up both their premises and have access to the surrounding orchard to run what we call bioblitzes, where lots of people are invited on to come and do their own citizen science biodiversity observations, but then also find out a little bit more about what was going on the cluster. I took part in one of those in the early days of the project, and it was very, very well attended and a great day. So there have been quite a lot of activities along the lines of things like Open Farm Sunday and so on that I'm sure you're familiar with, that can be utilised for that sort of direct community engagement.
Thanks very much.
We have any other questions? Iris.
I just wanted to offer another example. For in the Czech case, for example, there is also a forest kindergarten located at the Lead farm that is utilizing the biodiversity path on a regular basis, cares for the trees that have been planted along that path. And so I think there have been quite a few celebrations there to celebrate the achievements of what the cluster has been doing over the past 5 years, and a lot of community interactions that some of the local businesses have been, since they have been linked through framework, that they have been working together a little bit more, and also exchanged products that they have for sale in their farm shops and so on.
Okay, if there are no further comments on this particular topic at the moment, I'd like to move forward to the final discussion. Now, this is a discussion, and it's really, I'm looking for everybody who's on the call to share their thoughts and ideas on this. And this is really to look ahead to what the future of farmer clusters might be. Now, we're all sitting in different parts of the world, the UK and across Europe. So the futures might look very different depending on where we're actually thinking of those clusters being. But I'd like to start off that discussion by asking the framework participants where they see their own particular clusters going next. Are they going to carry on, or do they see a barrier to that happening? So do we have any clusters to offer up their thoughts on that? Otherwise, I shall come. Let's see any hands. Claire, lovely. Thank you, Claire. What do you think?
Yep, we had a meeting about that just last week with the cluster. I facilitate the Cranbourne Chase cluster, and very much they want to carry on, and we are sort of driven by the group, and we're going through a process now of looking at the priorities they set themselves at the very start 5 years ago, and what continues to be relevant, what's changed, and really taking it as an opportunity to have a bit of a refresh and a reset. And we've got, it's a big cluster, 10,000 hectares roughly, with 20 22 members, but are there any sort of gaps, any holes in our cluster that we want to plug? We don't want to get any bigger, we don't want to spread, but we have got a few bits of white space. So yeah, they're very much committed to building on what they've done, I would say.
Yeah, that's lovely to hear. Let me pick on Marco, Marco Baer from Luxembourg, because I mentioned the cluster that's based on Ramborn. Marco, if you're there, can you tell us what Ramborn and the producers there are thinking that they might do next, if anything?
Well, yes, Ramborn, as you may have read in one of the reports, has become a B Corp, which is, so they are also looking at the social component more deeply now. And I think our cluster is a little bit a special case because of the Ramborn being in the cluster. So the cider producer and all the farmers are delivering fruit to the cider producer, and they will continue for sure because they all have an economic interest. My feeling is that it's going more into the direction of, as I said, including a social component like a B Corp philosophy. And on the ground, the farmers, they are looking to go into closer collaborations also with the communities, because the community is managing some of the paths. For example, the path that we have been walking in the first General Assembly, and this is somehow dividing it. And yeah, that's what I think they are what we are going to do next. Of course, Framework was an excellent opportunity to set up this cluster. It's not 100% clear to me if we can continue, let's say, at the same intensity, because the facilitator was, of course, coming from a research institution. We have a little bit of funding, let's say, coming from the cluster itself. There was an initiative launched called the Adopt a Tree initiative, which brings in some funding, but it's not as much as we had, of course, from the Framework project for paying a facilitator.
Thank you, Marco. And Camilla, you have your hand up.
Yes, hello. Good afternoon, and thanks for the wonderful presentations. And so I'm willing to tell you something about the future of the Italian farmer cluster, working in the olive grove terraced landscape, and basically this area is very fragile from both agro-environmental point of view, but also socio-economic point of view. And so what we kind of have shown to the local farmers and olive growers is that the biodiversity situation in this region is actually quite good. So it's a very diversified system, very low input farming, and the region is therefore providing some very interesting opportunities to biodiversity.